The unbreakable heart love as a Stoic practice. Imagine love as a storm, a force of nature that sweeps you into its chaos, drenching you in lightning bright joy, then leaving you shivering in the wreckage of its aftermath. We've all stood in that tempest. We've felt the exhilaration of connection, the raw terror of losing it. Stoicism doesn't ask us to avoid the storm. Instead, it teaches us how to stand within it, eyes open, heart unflinching, knowing the rain will fall and the winds will howl, yet choosing to love anyway. This is the paradox at the core of Stoic love, to hold someone with all your tenderness while keeping your hands open, ready to let go. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who buried children and faced betrayal, wrote in his private journal, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Even in love, he reminds us, we are gardening in a field that fire may claim. The question isn't whether loss will come, but how we plant our seeds while the soil is still fertile. Consider Seneca's letters to his friend Lucilius, where he compares love to a ship voyage. You don't refuse to board the ship because it might sink. You pack wisely, learn to swim, and savor the horizon. When Seneca's own wife faced mortal illness, he didn't armor his heart against grief. He loved her fully, yet practiced premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, by acknowledging her mortality daily. This wasn't pessimism. It was a ritual of gratitude, a way to sharpen his appreciation for her presence. Modern Stoics might recognize this as negative visualization, but stripped of jargon. It's simply the act of holding a loved one's face in your hands and whispering, "You are here now," without demanding forever. Let me share a story. A student once asked Epictetus how to love without fear of loss. Epictetus, born a slave and no stranger to suffering, pointed to a ceramic cup. "Admire it," he said, "but remember, it is already broken." The student laughed, thinking it a riddle. But the lesson was visceral. That cup, like every person we cherish, is a temporary vessel. To love it isn't to deny its fragility. It's to drink deeply while it holds water. I think of my grandmother, who buried 2 husbands yet still planted roses each spring. When I asked her why she risked the grief, she said, "The roses don't owe me blooms. I owe them the sun." Stoic love is that garden tending without entitlement, mourning wilted petals without regretting the planting. Here's where we stumble. Society conflates love with ownership. We speak of my partner, my child, my friend, as if people are possessions. The Stoics reject this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What belongs to you? Your breath, your choices. All else is borrowed." Imagine a parent watching their child leave for college. The Stoic doesn't white-knuckle the doorframe, mourning the end of an era. They stand at the threshold, heart swelling with pride, because love isn't a cage. It's the wind beneath another's wings. This isn't detachment, it's devotion refined by wisdom. Yet, how do we reconcile this with the H of loss? Let's be clear, Stoicism never dismisses pain. When Seneca's friend wept over his son's death, Seneca didn't scold him for feeling. He wept with him. Stoic resilience isn't numbness. It's the courage to let sorrow flow through you like a river, trusting you won't drown. I once met a man who'd lost his wife to cancer. He carried her notebook everywhere, filled with her sketches of birds. She loved how they could leave the earth but choose to return. He said, "In that I heard the Stoic thesis. Love is a series of returns, to memories, to values, to the living who remain. We don't move on. We carry the love forward, letting it evolve but never evaporate." So, what's the practice? Start small. Next time you hug someone you love, pause. Feel their warmth, their breath, the fleeting miracle of their existence. Then, in your mind, release them. Not because you care less, but because you refuse to let fear of loss cheapen the moment. This is Stoic love in action, a dance between passion and equanimity, where the heart becomes unbreakable not by hardening, but by expanding, flexible as a willow in the storm, rooted yet unbound. The Stoic blueprint fundamentals in 3 acts now. Let's lay the foundation of this unshakable love, the Stoic blueprint in 3 acts. The first pillar, the dichotomy of control, is not a cold division but a liberation. Picture Epictetus, the former slave, teaching in Rome after his exile. His students came seeking power over external events. Wealth, reputation, love returned. Epictetus shattered their illusions with a simple truth. You control your judgments, your efforts, your desires, everything else, not yours. Imagine a musician pouring her soul into a performance. The Stoic musician doesn't fixate on applause or criticism. Her virtue lies in the precision of her practice, the integrity of her art. When the audience boos, she adjusts her technique, not her self-worth. This is love's parallel. You can't force someone to stay, but you can choose to love them without manipulation, to offer kindness without demanding it be mirrored. I think of a father teaching his daughter to ride a bike. His role isn't to prevent her scraped knees but to steady her courage. His hands hover, ready to release. Act 2. Amor Fati, Love of Fate. Nero ordered Seneca to slit his veins, yet Seneca's final moments were a masterclass in embracing the inevitable. As blood seeped into the bathwater, he dictated letters on the brevity of life, turning brutality into a philosophical crescendo. Amor Fati isn't passive resignation, it's the alchemy of transforming loss into fuel for growth. Consider a widow who volunteers at a hospice after her husband's death. She doesn't get over her grief. She lets it carve her into a vessel for others' pain. Marcus Aurelius, who buried 8 children, wrote, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything thrown into it." Even anguish becomes sacred when we burn it in the furnace of purpose. Modern love often resists this. We rage against breakups. Betrayal's the natural arc of parting. But Stoicism whispers this, too, is part of the story. Let it shape you, not shatter you. The third act, negative visualization, is often misunderstood as morbid pessimism. Not so. It's a wake-up call to the miracle of the present. Seneca, in his letters, urged Lucilius to live each day with his wife as if it were their last. Not to dwell on dread, but to magnify gratitude. Imagine a soldier deploying to war. The night before leaving, he memorizes the curve of his daughter's sleeping face, the cadence of her breath. He doesn't do this to torment himself, but to drink deeply from the well of now. My friend, a nurse during the pandemic, described holding iPads for dying patients. Their last words were never about grand achievements, she said. They whispered, "Tell my family, I saw the lilacs blooming outside the window this morning." Stoic premeditation strips away the illusion of permanence, forcing us to confront the raw gift of presence. These 3 acts intertwine like roots beneath an ancient oak. Control your efforts, love your fate, and rehearse life's fragility. This is how we love fiercely yet freely. A young couple I know writes apocalypse letters, each year detailing what they'd cherish if everything vanished tomorrow. It's not a morbid ritual. It's a celebration dressed in Stoic armor. They're practicing Epictetus's cup, admire it, but remember it's already broken. When the wife lost her job unexpectedly, they didn't crumble. "What already named what mattered," she said. Our late-night laughter, the way we dance in the kitchen. The rest was just china rattling in the cupboard. Critics argue this approach sterilizes love's passion. I say it intensifies it. Think of a sculptor who knows her marble will one day erode. Does she carve half-heartedly? No, she chisels with wild precision, knowing the temporary nature of her work is what makes it urgent. The Stoic lover is that sculptor. Every kiss is a masterpiece etched into sand, beautiful precisely because the tide will claim it. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, lost everything in a shipwreck before turning to philosophy. He didn't abandon hope. He recalibrated it, building a life where loss couldn't bankrupt his peace. So, how do we live this? Start with the body. When anxiety about loss grips you, a lover's silence, a parent's aging, press your palm to your chest. Feel the heartbeat. That rhythm is your only true possession. Everything else is a guest. Train your mind like a Spartan athlete each morning. Ask, what can I control today? Maybe only your tone during an argument, your patience in traffic. At night, trace one moment you'd miss if it were gone. The way sunlight slants through your window at dawn, your partner's habit of humming off key. This is the Stoic triad in motion: mastery, acceptance, reverence. Love and loss are not opposites. They are collaborators, co-authoring the story of your resilience. The Stoics knew this. They wrote in the ruins of empires, the quiet after children's laughter faded. Yet they left us not with despair, but a blueprint, a way to love as if death were over your shoulder, not to terrify you, but to awaken you. To love like Epictetus's broken cup, aware of its cracks, yet pouring freely anyway. Love is a verb, not a possession now. Let's step into the heart of what it means to love like a Stoic. Not as a clenched fist clinging to what we fear to lose, but as an open hand offering what we choose to give. Imagine a gardener planting seeds in a storm. She knows the wind might scatter them, the rain might drown them, yet she kneels in the mud anyway. This is love as a verb, the act of tending, not the guarantee of harvest. Modern romance often fixates on ownership, my partner, my happiness, my forever. But the Stoics whisper a radical truth. Love cannot be contained in a cage of permanence. It thrives only when released into the wild of intention. Epictetus, who taught that freedom lies in focusing on what's yours to govern, would remind us, you can't control another's heart, but you can choose to water it with integrity every day. Consider the mother teaching her child to swim. Her love isn't measured by whether the child never drowns, but by how she steadies their strokes, how she resists the urge to yank them back to shallow water. Each lesson is a practice in letting go, in trusting that her effort, not the outcome, is where virtue resides. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Love the people fate has given you, but do so with open palms." He buried children, faced betrayals, yet his meditations overflow not with bitterness, but with resolve to serve others despite life's fragility. This is the Stoic pivot. Love isn't a trophy to possess, but a fire to tend. When we confuse love with security, we build walls around a flame and wonder why it suffocates. Modern attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, obsessive, often root in the fear of losing what we've labeled ours. The Stoic alternative. Love is a series of deliberate actions. Listening deeply when you'd rather defend, choosing curiosity over blame when conflicts arise, sitting with a grieving friend without scrambling to fix their pain. Picture a couple navigating a terminal diagnosis. The Stoic partner doesn't rage against the timeline or bargain with the universe. Instead, they ask, how can I make our remaining days a sanctuary? They cook meals, replay old voicemails to hear the laughter tucked between words, trace the topography of wrinkles etched by decades of shared sun. Seneca, in his letter to Marcia on grief, urged her to love what is lost, but love what remains more fiercely. Even in endings, the verb persists, a choice to honor what was by nourishing what still is. The Zen koan rings true. To love a rose, you must love its thorns and its withering. I once met a man who planted a rosebush for his late wife. Each spring, he pruned the dead branches, not with mourning, but with reverence. The thorns remind me she wasn't perfect, he said, the petals falling. That's how I know we loved something real. Stoicism's negative visualization isn't about rehearsing tragedy. It's about dissolving the fantasy of flawlessness. When we stop demanding that love be painless or eternal, we start seeing it clearly, a mosaic of effort, forgiveness, and tiny acts of courage. Some fear this philosophy breeds detachment. Not so. It demands deeper engagement. Imagine a nurse holding the hand of a dying stranger. She knows she can't stop death, so she focuses on what she can offer: a final moment of dignity, a voice saying, "You're not alone." That's Stoic compassion, raw, active, unguarded. Zeno, after losing his wealth in a shipwreck, didn't retreat from the world. He rebuilt his life around serving others, declaring, "Loss stripped me of everything but my capacity to choose kindness." So how do we practice this? Start small. Next time you feel the itch to text, "Do you still love me?" Pause. Instead ask, "How can I love you better today?" Replace the hunger for guarantees with a commitment to show up. When a quarrel arises, don't weaponize silence. Ask yourself, what can I control here? Your tone, your willingness to understand, your refusal to let pride poison the space between you. My grandmother, widowed at 50, kept a journal of love verbs. After my grandfather's death, entries like, "Today, I smiled at the cashier who has his laugh," or "I told our story to the neighbor's child." She didn't cling to his memory. She let it move through her, a river shaping the canyon. Stoic love is a rebellion against the cult of forever. It's the bartender who learns sign language to chat with a deaf regular. The teenager who sits with their heartbroken parent, not offering solutions, just passing tissues. The couple who, after a miscarriage, plant a tree that will outlive them, its roots cradling their unnamed grief. These aren't grand gestures, they're quiet, Persistent affirmations that love isn't a noun to possess, but a pulse to sustain. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one. Replace the obsession with being loved with the audacity to love. Knowing the tide will come, the petals will fall, and your hands, though empty, will still smell of roses." The alchemy of lost grief as a master teacher. Let's sit with the raw truth. Every Stoic learns to hold gently. Loss isn't a detour on the path of love. It's the path itself. Picture a blacksmith shaping a sword. The steel doesn't become unbreakable by avoiding the forge. It's hammered, heated, and plunged into icy water until its molecules realign. Grief, in Stoic practice, is that forge. C.S. Lewis, in A Grief Observed, described mourning as a valley where everything echoes, a place where even his faith in God felt like door slammed in his face. Yet through his anguish, he stumbled upon a revelation. The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's Stoicism in its most human form, not denying sorrow's weight, but letting it compress us into something denser, truer. Negative visualization, often misunderstood as morbid pessimism, is actually a practice of radical gratitude. Imagine a father recording his daughter's laughter on an ordinary Tuesday. The Stoic doesn't do this out of fear she'll vanish tomorrow, but to fully savor the miracle of today's unremarkable joy. Epictetus urged his students to kiss their loved ones each night as if it were the last, not to feed anxiety, but to dissolve the illusion of permanence that numbs us to life's sweetness. I once met a woman who kept a jar of moments. On her desk, ticket stubs, dried petals, a pebble from a hike. When her husband died suddenly, she didn't open the jar. "I didn't need to," she said. "The practice of collecting taught me to hold each day like a firefly. Brief, brilliant, already slipping through my fingers." Lewis's rage at the universe. What do people mean when they say, "I'm not afraid of God because I know He's good"? Have they never even been to a dentist? Mirrors our instinct to protest loss. But Stoicism invites a pivot. Not, "Why did this happen?" "What now?" A student of mine, after her miscarriage, began volunteering at a neonatal unit. "I can't hold my child," she said, "but I can hold others' fears." This is eudaimonic resilience, the alchemy of turning pain into purpose. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Notice he doesn't say, "Overcome the obstacle." He says, "Let it reshape your direction, like a river carving a canyon." Toxic positivity shouts, "Don't cry, everything happens for a reason." Stoicism kneels beside you in the mud and whispers, "Cry. Then ask what this tears can water." When Seneca consoled Marcia, whose son died young, he didn't minimize her grief. He wrote, "Let your tears flow, but let them also cease. Let your sighs be deep, but let them end." Validation and agency, hand in hand. Consider a mother teaching her son to grieve his lost dog. She doesn't rush to replace the pet or plaster over his sadness with platitudes. She says, "It's okay to miss his wet nose waking you up. Let's build a scrapbook of his goofiest moments." By honoring the ache, she teaches him that sorrow and gratitude can coexist, that love's depth is measured by how much it unravels us. The Stoic archer metaphor applies here. We can aim our lives with care, but once the arrow flies, it's no longer ours to control. A friend who lost her singing voice to throat cancer told me, "I spent months raging at the arrow. Then I realized I could still teach others to sing." Her new students, transgender teens finding their vocal ranges, refugees learning lullabies in a foreign tongue, are her second arrow, the one she chooses to craft from the splinters of the first. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who endured exile and persecution, argued that hardship is the muse of invention, forcing us to discover resources we'd have otherwise left dormant. Eudaimonic resilience isn't about moving on, but moving with, carrying loss as a companion, not a chain. Think of a tree grafting a broken branch. The wound becomes part of its structure, a knotted testament to survival. When the Japanese art of kintsugi fills cracks with gold, it doesn't pretend the bowl was never shattered. It says, "Here's where it broke, and here's how it shines now." A veteran I know, haunted by PTSD, started a woodworking shop for at-risk youth. "The same hands that once held a rifle," he said. "No, teach kids to carve hope from oak." His pain didn't vanish, it became a bridge. Critics argue this perspective is too austere, demanding we turn hearts into fortresses. But Stoicism asks the opposite: love wildly, grieve fully, then rise and serve. Imagine a nurse who lost her own child to cancer, now cradling terminal patients in their final hours. She doesn't heal, she bears witness. That's the Stoic concept of sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all beings. By touching another's pain, we don't dilute our own. We weave it into a larger tapestry of meaning. As Zeno taught, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. Grief, at its core, is a form of listening to the echoes of what's gone and to the whispers of what remains. So let's close with a ritual. Tonight, light a candle for a loss that still flickers in you. Don't rush to extinguish it with false silver linings. Let it illuminate the contours of your love. Then ask, as Epictetus would, what is mine to do with this flame? Maybe it's writing a letter to someone who's grieving. Maybe it's finally volunteering at that hospice. Or maybe it's simply sitting with the truth that to have loved at all is to have signed up for this ache. And that, in the end, the H itself is the fingerprint of having dared to love bravely. The Stoics didn't promise we'd escape the forge. They simply reminded us that fire is what turns iron into steel and grief into grace. The eternal flame synthesis and call to arms. Consider the candle from last night's ritual. How its flame trembled but endured, fed by the very wax it consumed. This is the paradox Stoicism asks us to embody, to let love and loss sustain each other, like fire breathing oxygen into its own heart. The phoenix myth isn't about avoiding ashes, it's about recognizing that rebirth requires burning. Marcus Aurelius, who buried 8 children, wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." Notice he doesn't say, "Guard your heart against sorrow." He commands us to love fully, knowing fate will unravel what we weave. I think of a gardener planting tulip bulbs in November. She presses each bulb into cold soil, aware that frost may claim some. Does her knowledge of winter's bite make her hesitate? No. She digs with dirt under her nails, imagining April's blaze of color. Stoic love is this act of planting in the face of frost. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, advised, "Hug your child close tonight, not tighter because they might leave, but because they're here now." When we stop bracing for loss, we start seeing the ordinary as sacred: a partner's snore, a friend's eye roll, the way sunlight slants through a window you may one day leave. Yet this philosophy isn't passive acceptance. It's a call to arms, to wield love as both shield and spear. Imagine a soldier who writes poems between battles. His ink stains the pages, his hands shake, but he writes anyway. Later, when shrapnel tears through his journal, he doesn't regret the wasted words. He knows the act of writing was the armor, not the paper. Epictetus, born a slave, taught, "We must die, but we need not die groaning." Replace die with los. And the lesson sharpens: we will grieve, but we need not grieve paralyzed. A woman I know keeps her late brother's voicemails but deleted the app required to play them. Their unplayability, she said, makes them more alive. Now his voice exists everywhere, in rain, in strangers' laughter. This is negative visualization made tangible by embracing the void. She multiplied her brother's presence. Zeno, founder of Stoicism, lost everything in a shipwreck before turning to philosophy. He didn't rebuild his fortune. He rebuilt his understanding of fortune itself. "I swam away with richer thoughts than the cargo I lost," he might have said. Critics call this delusion. I call it defiance. When a child builds a sandcastle knowing the tide will claim it, her joy isn't naive. It's a rebellion against entropy. My friend Javier, a firefighter, carries photos of every person he failed to save. They're not ghosts, he insists. They're compass needles. Each loss directs him to love harder, run faster, fight the next flame with ferocity honed by regret. This is a more fatty in action. Loving fate, even when it cuts. So I ask you, will you love as if loss is impossible, or because it's inevitable? The first is fantasy, the second, Stoicism's tempered steel. To love despite loss is human. To love through loss is alchemy. Like a forest that thrives after wildfire, roots drawing nutrients from ash, we too can find in our scars the nutrients for new growth. The phoenix doesn't rise in spite of the fire. It rises through it, wings forged in the same heat that tried to destroy it. Let your heart be that phoenix. Let every ending plant the seed of a beginning you can't yet imagine. And when the world whispers, protect yourself, answer, no. I choose to burn.